everyone, it's Caroline. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm realizing now that the lighting is questionable at best, so I really do apologize for that if it gets weird throughout the video, which I'm sure it will. Listen, I know that we are in like our last days of January 2022, but I really still wanted to bring you my like end of year reading survey for 2021. These types of videos are my favorite types of videos to watch because you get to just learn more about people's reading preferences and like their identity as readers, which I think is really fun. And then I also love filming them because it gives me the ability to talk about a lot of books in hopefully a short-ish amount of time. I will go ahead and leave the blog post that I think had the original sort of structure of this end of year reading survey. In addition to the original post, I'll leave also just like the questions that I answered because they might differ from the original. I'm gonna start out with reading stats for 2021. I don't have a whole lot to share in terms of stats just because I have used Goodreads to track my reading in years past, and Goodreads doesn't give you a whole lot of stats, so I'm hoping in 2022 to track a few more things, like a few more categories like format of books and then maybe page count as well. But for now, I am going to share with you what I can get from Goodreads. So the first thing is how many books did I read in 2021, which was 62. I have no real opinion about this number. This isn't the most that I've ever read in a year. It's not the least that I've ever read in a year. So yeah, it's not anything. It's just a number and it's 62 and it's the amount of books that I read in the year. Next is my most read genre from 2021, and I'm going to kind of make a combination genre of like general literary contemporary fiction. And at first that seemed not right to me, but then when I consider that I included middle grade and young adult and some anthologies were thrown in there as well. And then there were a few books that I placed in this category that may have had a speculative or otherworldly, very small element, but just like not enough to put it in another genre. So I think considering all of that, it may make sense that sort of literary contemporary genre blend being my most read. That's all the stats that I can share with you. I told you that it was going to be brief, but now we're gonna move into kind of superlatives. The first one being my favorite 2021 release that I read in 2021. This was interesting because I wouldn't necessarily consider myself someone who is an avid new release reader, but when I listed them all out, I was surprised, one, at the number of books that there were, and then two, how many of these I actually really enjoyed. There is one that I snuck in at the very end of 2021 that stands out among the rest, but I'm gonna give some honorable mentions at the end. But my standout one and like my real answer to my favorite new release is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I had heard so many great things about Andy Weir that 5,000% got confirmed when I read this book. I had heard always about his ability to take scientific jargon and make it accessible, which if you don't know what this book is about, we're basically following this like middle school science teacher turned astronaut as he's on this mission to save Earth and humanity because the sun is dying essentially, and then he's slowly regaining his memories from his life on Earth, so we get those revealed to us in flashback format. And oh my gosh, if it wasn't just the most fantastic thing, another thing that I had always heard about Andy Weir was his humor in his writing and his ability to make these dynamic characters, which again got confirmed tenfold with the character of Dr. Ryland Grace plus a couple of other characters. Just like the witty banter and then the friendship dynamics were pristine, top-notch. I'm so glad that I snuck it in at the end of the year. A couple of other honorable mentions from genres that I wouldn't consider myself a big reader of, but these 2021 releases like stood out in those genres. I'm not really a thriller reader, but In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead, and then also The Girls I've Been by Tess Sharp were thriller-esque books that I ate up every bit of those. I'm also not a huge historical fiction reader, but I am so grateful that I read The Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Malinda Lo. It just makes me so happy that there are young adult books out there that are doing like what Malinda Lo did with Last Night at the Telegraph Club. I'm also not a romance reader, but Emily Henry stole my whole heart with People We Meet on Vacation. That was such a surprising read. Then a 2021 release that I was anticipating loving and then did end up loving was The Shape of Thunder by Jasmine Warga. I'm so glad that Jasmine Warga is writing in the middle grade genre. I think she's really hit her stride with that. Next question is my favorite older title that I read in 2021, and it feels really odd to call this an older title. I don't know why. It's just like I guess it's a classic, so it's not like a backlist necessarily. I don't really know. It's Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery, and it 1000% makes sense why it is a classic, because the fact that I, an almost 30-year-old living in 2021 at the time that I read it, could enjoy a book about a 10-year-old orphan from like the late, I don't even know, 1800s, early 1900s, just is astonishing, and it makes sense that like it's canon. Anne is vivacious and witty and just everything that I think I wanted to be when I was a kid. She makes mistakes, she atones for her mistakes, and she's just, the way that she affects the other characters in the book is absolutely wonderful, and I was so glad that I got to witness it when I read it. Next question is a book that I read that lived up to the hype in 2021. Listen, millions, I think millions probably at this point, of people have hyped up this book, this series, but the reason that I picked it up in the first place is because my students, every single year that I've been teaching, have hyped this up, and this past year in 2021, they effectively like bullied me into reading this, which is The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan, the first in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series. I really just picked this up to like get my students off my back. I was not expecting to be completely blown away and invested in a like adventure series about demigods. So I was so pleased when I just lost my mind over this book. It's also evident that like I love something when it's the beginning of a series and then I actually continue on in the series, which I did in 2021. And I guess I just have to thank my students for basically forcing me to read it, because it was one of my favorite reading experiences I had in 2021. Next up, contrasting from a book that did live up to its hype, a book that did not live up to its hype. I did put out my most disappointing reads of 2021 last week, so if you watched that, you probably have already heard me talk about this, so I'll make it quick. Anxious People by Frederick Backman did not live up to the hype that I feel like it was getting from others, and then it also did not live up to the hype that I had placed on it. Beartown being one of my favorite book that I read in 2021. I guess that I just went into Anxious People expecting a certain tone, and it's not what I got at all. The tone was very slapsticky and like trying to be humorous, but then also trying to be poignant at the same time. And I know that a lot of people would probably say that Backman managed to pull that off in Anxious People. I didn't feel that, and I felt really disconnected from the characters and disconnected from the story because I never really knew what I was supposed to be taking seriously. Next is my favorite character from a book that I read in 2021, and I am gonna have to twist this a little bit because as I was writing down potential characters that could answer this question, I realized a couple of funny things. One of them is that they're all characters from books that I've already mentioned in this video, and that made me contemplate that I think what really makes me love a book is the character dynamics and the way that characters interact with other characters. So instead I'm going to turn this into like my favorite character dynamics of 2021 from books that I read in 2021. The first one being Percy and Grover from The Lightning Thief, and then the subsequent books in the series. I told you that they were all going to be from books that I've already mentioned. Next up is Ryland and pretty much any character that he interacts with in Project Hail Mary, but one in particular that if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. And then Anne and Diana. All of these character dynamics just truly show pure, raw, unfiltered friendship and what it means to like be a friend and put yourself not on a back burner, but just like to put your friends before you and to fight and love your friends. And oh, I loved it so much. I love those relationships so much. And then I loved the books because of those character dynamics. Next up is my least favorite character from a book that I read in 2021. And I thought about taking this a couple of different ways. And I ultimately decided to pick a group of main characters that were written to be very unlikable, but I know that it was the author's intention to kind of make them that way, and that was the group of main characters, the 4 main characters from The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. Every single decision that these characters made throughout made me so frustrated, and I had to like put down the book and be like, oh my gosh, open your eyes. How do you not realize what is going on? So that was the intention of the author. I know it was, because while they were super unlikable, I was also so invested in their storylines and just so like aggravated by their decision making, which it shows it's the mark of Stephen Graham Jones's genius that he was able to write these characters that were intentionally unlikable, and yet I was still invested in their story up until the very bitter end. Next up is the book with the most surprising moment, which I almost skipped over this question because I didn't think that I was gonna have an answer, but then I remembered that I had this reaction during a reading vlog. Oh my God. I'm freaking out. I'm freaking out. Where I was reading We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faizal, and I remember the specific moment that caused me to have that super mellow, dramatic reaction. And it wasn't necessarily that anything, it wasn't like a twist, because We Hunt the Flame, it's not a thriller, it's a young adult fantasy. It was more a reveal about a character relationship. It just shocked me to my core, because after that was revealed, just like a bunch of things clunked into place. And even thinking about it now, I'm gonna get like overly emotional just because I loved those characters so much. I wanna backtrack to favorite character of 2021 and just say Altair should have been mentioned. But there's not a whole lot else that I can really say about this moment, right? Because it's a spoiler, but what I can say is that like Hafsa Faizal is really doing it in terms of young adult fantasy. And if you haven't picked this young adult fantasy up yet, please do it. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Next up is my favorite writing style of the year, which this answer is surprising because it took me about 100 pages to actually appreciate the writing style. And I think that anyone who reads this book will find like a similar experience. It's Everything Sad is Untrue, a True Story by Daniel Nayeri. In this, Nayeri writes like a semi-autobiographical account of his life growing up in Oklahoma as an Iranian refugee, but then interspliced into that story, this is one of the reasons that made the writing so wonderful. He interwove these Persian folkloric tales about his ancestry, and it was just a book as a whole that you could tell was a life's work. But the writing itself really makes you work for it, like work for the appreciation of it. But if you are willing to work for it, it's a huge payoff. It's meandering and slow and stream of consciousness at times, but the way that Nayeri constructs his sentences and is able to interweave like these childhood tales also with these folkloric tales, it's unlike any other thing out there, and that I can guarantee you. Like, you're not gonna read any other writing like Daniel Nayeri's writing in this book. Next up is the book that I pushed the most people to read in 2021, which is a hard question to answer on your own. I think what I wanted it to be was Everything Sad is Untrue. I wanted so many people, like, I want everyone to read this, but I think very few people have read this. Thinking back on the books that I've read, most of the books that like I post about on Instagram get at least a couple of people to pick them up. So The Shape of Thunder by Jasmine Warga, I actually think that with this one, after I read it, I loved it so much, and I actually read it before its release date. So I think I posted on Instagram that I would like be giving copies of it away. That's how much I appreciated the story that Jasmine Warga told in here. It's like life-saving. I think that it has the capability to like actually save and change people's lives. Kind of the same with the other book that I feel like I wanted a lot of people to read, or pushed a lot of people to read, which is Fighting Words by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. Just a book that, like, if I could create a required reading list for the whole world, Fighting Words and The Shape of Thunder would both be on that list. Next is the book that I recommended the most, which kind of seems like it should be synonymous with the book that I pushed the most people to read. However, there was a book that I recommended a lot to people like in my personal life, my dad in particular, but I didn't necessarily recommend it online. The book is Kent State, 4 Dead in Ohio by Derf Bic Derf, and I think this is just a book that I would recommend to just anyone in general. It does a lot of different things. It's a graphic novelization of the infamous Kent State shooting. And I am not a graphic novel reader, but I found this one very easy to read, and Derf Bic Derf did a really excellent job at combining like the images with the story. I'm also not a big nonfiction reader, particularly when it's like surrounding a specific historic event. However, Derf Bic Derf did something really cool in that he followed people's specific storylines surrounding the shooting itself, and he also did a really good job at intersplicing facts and historic details that give context to the people's storylines. So I think that this book in particular would be a good recommendation for just like people in general, because it covers like people who like to read nonfiction, also people who like to read fiction, people who like to read about historical events, graphic novel readers. There's just like a lot of different subsects of readers that I think would find a lot of enjoyment in reading this book. Next up is my favorite newly discovered author. There could have been a lot of answers to this question because I read a lot of new authors this year that I did enjoy, but I think what I'm gonna go with is Youngzi Chu, who is not a new author by any means, but I read The Night Tiger by Youngzi Chu early this year, and I always know that a book is a success if I want to go into the author's backlist after reading the book, which is what happened when I got to the end of The Night Tiger. Youngzi Chu's ability to create this like ethereal, effervescent atmosphere was so apparent in The Night Tiger, and from what I've heard about previous books that she's written, that kind of tone transfers throughout her books. So I'm just really glad that I not discovered her, that seems weird to say, but that I read from her in 2021, because that means I have more books to look forward to in the years to come. Next up is my favorite cover from a book that I read in 2021, and I'm really running the risk of like exposing myself of being the boring person that I am in like saying this book, but just hear me out. I don't have the physical copy even to show you, but it's We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry, and listen, this color combination really gets me. I love it so much, like the neon with that turquoise. I also think that it really fits the 1980s time period that it takes place in. The next two questions I'm going to combine. I've done this before, and I like combining these questions because I like featuring like a dynamic book. So I'm combining a book that made me cry with a book that made me laugh, and I'm answering with one book that was able to make me do both, which is Solutions and Other Problems by Ali Brosh. This book really took me by surprise. It's a memoir and essays about the author's life, but it's told in graphic novel format, like in her signature art style. And I am not kidding you, with this book, she would make me laugh out loud by myself on one page, and then cause me to like audibly sob on the next page. There's themes of grief and loss and neglect, and for me, the sign of a good book is a book that is able, like a book that has range and is able to make me cry and laugh, which this book definitely did. So this last kind of question, I'm actually going to combine a bunch of different questions from the original survey. There's like most surprising read, or like book that you love the most that's outside your typical genre comfort zone, or like an unexpected 5-star that you gave. So I'm gonna kind of combine all of those into this last part and give a couple of different answers. My first one that I'm going to say is actually a book that I've already brought up, but it was just so good that it bears repeating. I am not an adult mystery thriller lover. Every single time I try, I don't get what everyone else seems to get, except with this one, oh my gosh. In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead gave me everything that I think that I always want out of the mystery thriller genre. I think one of the biggest reasons for this is that it featured a group, and I really, as I've said before, am someone who, in order to love a book, I have to get invested in the characters, which I don't think character investment is at the forefront of most mystery thriller books. However, featuring this group of characters and like how they first met, and then flashing forward to the future and how they're treating each other now, made me love this book so much and just have such a fun reading experience with it. Another thriller that I loved this year that was surprising, because I don't love thrillers. This one's more of a sci-fi thriller, so maybe the sci-fi element made me love it a lot, is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This one plays with time and like parallel universes, which I think is something that I'm coming to understand that I love reading about, but also the thriller elements of this book. Like when people say edge of your seat, I read this book, I think in 2 sittings, and I never stay up late at night reading, but with this one, like I was forced to, because I couldn't end a chapter and not just like be desperate to move on to the next. And the last book that I'm going to mention on this survey, also the last one for this like surprising, unpredicted 5-star outside of my comfort zone category, is Lovely War by Julie Berry. It's a sweeping historical fiction with like heavy romance elements, and typically you could not like pay me enough to read something that has that description with it. However, Julie Berry's writing is like velvet, like an individually wrapped treat on each page, and I loved being in that author's writing so much. And also, she's a genius for telling these character stories from the perspective of Greek gods and goddesses. I think she did something really special with that. The dynamics between gods and mortals is something that, again, I think I'm discovering that I really like reading about in books. And that is going to bring me to the end of my 2021 survey. I have said this before, and I promise to like stop harping on it, but 2021 was not that great of a year for me in terms of reading, and I am so like happy to report that 2022 is already going so much better. But I'm actually really glad that I did this survey, because it made me reminisce on, even though it was just such a frustrating reading year, I really did have some books that I loved reading in 2021. So I hope that you enjoyed watching this, and I hope that you learned a little bit more about me as a reader, and I hope that wherever you are having a fantastic day, and I will see you again very, very soon. Goodbye.